In the southern hemisphere's autumn of 1960, the air in Villa Fiorito tasted of dust and diesel. On a patch of hard-packed earth between corrugated tin shacks, a 3-year-old boy named Diego Armando Maradona chased a strange, lumpy sphere. It was a pelota de trapo, a leather casing his father had stitched tight around rags and knotted string. His first touch sent it skittering over the uneven ground, a dance beginning on the most unforgiving of stages. That ball became his constant companion. As he grew, the labyrinth of unpaved streets and narrow alleyways became his training ground. Here, space was a luxury, and opponents were older boys who showed no mercy. To survive, Diego learned to shrink the game to the space between his feet, developing a low center of gravity and explosive changes of direction. The ball seemed tethered to his left boot by an invisible string as he weaved through challenges, his dribble a product of necessity forged in the barrio's chaos. His raw talent soon funneled into structure with Los Tebolitas, his neighborhood youth team. Coaches watched, astonished, as the small boy dictated play, his vision seeing passing lanes where others saw only traffic. In cramped, sun-baked pitches across Buenos Aires, he began orchestrating victories. This was not just play, it was an apprenticeship. On those dusty fields, the unique amalgam of street cunning and innate genius that would define Diego Maradona was being meticulously, relentlessly assembled. The dusty pitches of Villa Fiorito were now a memory. In October of 1976, a 15-year-old Diego Maradona walked onto the manicured grass of Argentinos Juniors Stadium, pulling the number 16 shirt over his shoulders. His legs, still thin from adolescence, carried him into a professional match against Talleres de Córdoba. The crowd murmured, unsure if this boy could survive among men. Days later, a simple contract lay on a wooden desk in the club's offices. Maradona's signature, still developing its famous flourish, committed him to Argentinos Juniors. Club officials exchanged relieved glances. They had secured their prodigy. The ink was barely dry when the first newspaper headlines appeared in Buenos Aires, calling him El Pibe de Oro, the Golden Boy. Reporters began staking out the training ground. By the following season, the murmurs had become a roar. Every feint and dribble was dissected in the sports dailies. Photographers jostled for shots of the teenager leaving his modest family home, his face a mask of concentration. The pressure was a tangible weight, but on the pitch his response was pure instinct, a sudden burst of speed, a defender left stumbling, a goal that silenced any remaining doubt about his destiny. From the adoring crowds of Buenos Aires, Diego Maradona arrived in Spain for the 1982 World Cup as Argentina's undisputed talisman. The pressure was immense. In the group stage against Italy, defender Claudio Gentile was assigned one brutal task: stop Maradona at any cost. For 90 minutes, Gentile shadowed him, a relentless presence whose shirt tugs and late tackles were a constant physical declaration of war. The tournament's second phase pitted Argentina against Brazil in a classic South American clash. Maradona, still aching from Gentile's treatment, sought to inspire, but Brazil's fluid attack was overwhelming. Frustration boiled over. In the 85th minute, after a series of niggling fouls, Maradona lashed out at Brazilian midfielder Batista, his studs connecting with the player's thigh. The referee's red card was immediate, flashing under the Sarria Stadium lights. Walking alone toward the tunnel, his head bowed, Maradona's first World Cup as a global star ended in disgrace. Argentina lost 3-1 and were eliminated. The images were stark. A genius subdued by violence, then succumbing to his own temper. He left Spain not as a champion, but as a prodigy who had just endured a very public, very painful education. The plane touched down in Naples, and Diego Maradona stepped into a different world. 75,000 voices roared from the concrete bowl of the Stadio San Paolo, a sound that shook the hot July air. For a club that had never won a major trophy, his arrival wasn't a transfer. It was a seismic event, a promise whispered across the impoverished south of Italy. Inside the stadium, chaos reigned. Flashbulbs popped like machine gun fire as Maradona navigated a scrum of journalists. He held up the sky-blue Napoli shirt, its number 10 stark against the fabric. His fingers traced the club's crest, a symbol of a city that saw in him not just a footballer, but a liberator, a chance to finally challenge the wealthy northern powers of Italian football. The contract was signed. The world's most expensive player now belonged to Napoli. He looked out at the sea of expectant, sunburned faces from the podium. The weight of their hope was palpable, a physical pressure. In that moment, the troubled years in Barcelona fell away. Here, in this passionate, chaotic port city, Diego Maradona found a home ready to be rebuilt in his image. 4 years after the disappointment in Spain, Maradona arrived in Mexico for the 1986 World Cup, carrying the weight of a nation. The quarter-final in Mexico City's Azteca Stadium was not just another match. The opponent was England, and the air crackled with a tension that stretched far beyond the dry, high-altitude pitch. Just 4 years earlier, Argentina and the United Kingdom had fought the Falklands War, a bitter conflict over a remote archipelago in the South Atlantic. For many Argentines, this was a chance for a different kind of victory. The match ball, a leather Adidas Azteca, sat on the center circle under a punishing sun. The game was a tense, physical stalemate for 51 minutes. Then, Maradona charged into the England penalty area. He leapt, arm raised, and punched the ball past goalkeeper Peter Shilton. The Tunisian referee saw nothing amiss. In the chaotic aftermath, Maradona later described the goal as scored a little with the head of Maradona and a little with the hand of God. The English players protested in vain, their shouts swallowed by the roar of Argentine relief. The controversy of the hand of God goal was still a raw, open wound for England when, just 4 minutes later, Maradona received the ball inside his own half. What followed was not a punch, but pure, undiluted genius. He turned and began to run, the dry turf kicking up dust with each touch. He slalomed past 5 English defenders, their desperate lunges finding only air, before calmly rounding Shilton and slotting the ball home. In one astonishing sequence, he had embodied both the cunning and the sublime artistry of his football. But the controversy was still crackling in the air when Maradona collected the ball just inside his own half. The stadium's roar was a low, expectant hum. He turned, his blue shirt a stark contrast against the dry, sun-bleached turf of the Azteca. With a single, deceptive drop of the shoulder, he left the first English midfielder grasping at empty space, and the journey began. His run was not a sprint, but a slalom, a series of calculated feints. He wove through the heart of the English defence, his low centre of gravity making him seem to glide over the ground. Terry Butcher lunged, Terry Fenwick stumbled, each defender was left off balance, a statue in his wake. The crowd's murmur swelled into a deafening wave as he carved a path from the halfway line into the penalty area. Peter Shilton, the veteran goalkeeper, rushed from his line, but Maradona had already committed him. With one final, delicate touch to the right, he created a sliver of space. The shot was not powerful, but perfectly placed, rolling just inside the far post. In 60 seconds, he had transformed a geopolitical grudge match into a canvas for pure, undiluted genius, a goal that would be replayed forever. Back in Naples, the impossible became tangible. The final whistle at the Stadio San Paolo on a May afternoon in 1987 unleashed a roar that shook the city's foundations. Diego Maradona, his blue shirt soaked with sweat, was hoisted onto the shoulders of teammates who had once been considered journeymen. They had just secured the point needed to clinch the Scudetto, a trophy that had never before resided south of Rome. The celebration spilled from the stadium into the labyrinthine streets of the Spanish Quarter. A river of humanity, waving sky-blue flags and chanting Maradona's name, flowed toward the grand Piazza del Plebiscito. Shopkeepers bolted their doors, not out of fear, but to join the tide. For the people of the Mezzogiorno, the historically neglected south of Italy, this was more than a football title. It was a seismic act of defiance against the wealthy northern clubs that had long dominated Serie A. In the piazza, under the shadow of the royal palace, Maradona raised the heavy silver shield of the Serie A trophy. The sea of faces below him, many streaked with tears, reflected a decade of economic hardship and social marginalization finally transcended. He had not just scored goals, he had weaponized his genius to deliver a championship to a city that saw itself in his own combative underdog spirit. Naples was no longer just a port city. It was, for the first time, the capital of Italian football. 4 years after his triumph in Mexico, Maradona returned to a World Cup. But this time, the stage was Italy, the country he now called home. Argentina, defending champions, advanced through the tournament not with the dazzling brilliance of 1986, but with a gritty defensive resilience. Their captain, however, was a diminished force, his left ankle swollen and wrapped in thick layers of white tape before every match. In the final at Rome's Stadio Olimpico, the strapping could not hide his limp. West Germany's defenders, led by Lothar Matthäus, funneled every attack away from him. The match was a tense, ugly stalemate, decided not by genius, but by a single controversial penalty awarded to the Germans in the 85th minute. Andreas Bremer converted, his low shot skidding just past Sergio Goycochea's dive. There would be no miracle comeback. At the final whistle, Maradona stood motionless on the halfway line, tears streaking through the sweat and dust on his face as West Germany celebrated. The image of a hobbled king, defeated in the empire he had once conquered with Napoli, signaled the definitive end of his World Cup story. The ultimate prize had slipped from his grasp. The final whistle in Rome had barely faded when a different kind of storm gathered. Back in Naples, the adulation that once felt like a shield began to thin. The ankle that carried a nation now ached with a deeper, more private pain. In the shadow of his own stadium, Maradona's world was contracting, the dazzling lights of his triumphs now casting long, complicated shadows. The official FIFA letter arrived in March of 1991, its formal language a cold counterpoint to the chaos it described. It cited a positive test for cocaine following a Serie A match. The suspension was for 15 months, a verdict that stripped him not just of football, but of his identity. The document was a stark administrative end to a period of spiraling personal control. News cameras captured him later that year, being led from a stadium in handcuffs, his head bowed against a flashbulb storm. This was no tactical foul on the pitch. This was a very public surrender to a private battle. The genius who danced past defenders now navigated a gauntlet of police and journalists, his struggle with addiction and authority laid bare for the world to witness. The final whistle blew on November the 25th, 2020, in a quiet house in Tigre, Argentina. Diego Maradona, just weeks after brain surgery, suffered a fatal cardiac arrest. News crackled across the planet not as a bulletin, but as a seismic wave of disbelief. In Buenos Aires, the afternoon traffic seemed to freeze, drivers leaning out of windows, radios blaring the same impossible headline. That night, Naples wept. They painted his face on the shutters of the Spanish Quarter and draped his number 10 jersey over the iron railings of the Stadio San Paolo. In Buenos Aires, a river of candles and handwritten notes flooded the entrance to La Bombonera, home of his beloved Boca Juniors. The grief was raw, public and vast, a global family mourning its flawed, brilliant patriarch. His legacy, however, refused to be confined to memory. It lived on in the fabric of the game itself. On pitches from Barcelona to Buenos Aires, a new generation of players pulled on the number 10 jersey, a number he had mythologized. When Lionel Messi lifted the Copa America for Argentina in 2021, he did so wearing that same sacred digit, a direct line drawn from one genius to the next.